You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on iTunes and at facebook.com/DCAU Review. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome to the DCAU Review. I'm your host, Cal Renner. Alongside me, as always, good friend, the guy that runs our Twitter at DCAU Review. Check this out, if you will. And my brother, Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 16 of the DCAU Review.
I am so filled with rage right now.
Oh boy. Well, why don't you tell the audience, before we get into which episode we're doing here, why don't you tell them the title of this week's episode?
This week's episode is called Brave New Metropolis.
That's right. And before we get into the actual breakdown of the plot, which I'll get you into real quick in just a second, let the audience know, before going into this episode, we were extremely excited to do this one. At least I was. Fond memories of this episode. It's an episode that deals with an alternate dimension of Superman where he's taken over Metropolis after Lois dies in his universe. Lois goes into this universe through sort of happenstance through a Star Labs experiment in our current Superman DCAU dimension. So she goes into this other dimension where she has died and Superman has teamed up with Lex Luthor to take over Metropolis. Superman has this awesome new costume that's all black and has a red S on it, and just super cool in our minds. When we got into this episode, however, something happened.
and that is, we can kind of just jump right into plot here. The idea of this episode is interesting. We've seen it explored in the Injustice games and their companion comics, which are very well written. Tom Taylor writes those. They're very good. They're very interesting, very striking. Similar story there. Lois and Superman's unborn child are killed by Superman, and so he takes over the world and becomes a dictator of sorts and will crush anyone who gets in his way, because all that matters now is that he has to keep people safe, and he prioritizes the people's safety above their own freedoms, above their own opinions on how the world should work. It doesn't matter. It's his rule. His word is now law, and he's going to stop everything. So that idea has been explored. It's sort of touched on in Batman vs. Superman, the idea of what would it be like if Superman, turned those red eyes that shoot fire. What if he started looking at average citizens with those? That's a theme that's been explored. It's an interesting theme.
It's also later explored in the Justice Lords episode.
Correct. And so the basic idea there is very interesting. But I guess we can just dive right in. This episode has some of the worst execution, I thought, of a great idea that I've ever seen. I did not remember disliking this episode at all. I hated this episode from a plot standpoint. I gave plot a 3 out of 10. That is the same score I gave the effing Underdwellers. I am full of rage.
He really is. And I was not expecting... Okay, so you gave 3 out of 10. I gave it... I ended up giving it 5 out of 10. So I didn't think this was executed as well as I remember it being. And sure, we have the benefit of the doubt now of looking at this through 2018 glasses and looking back and seeing the ways that this sort of storyline has been explored and executed, like you said, on maybe a better level. But you found fault with a lot of the plot holes in this episode.
Well, so it starts out, as I said, we're jumping into plot here. So Lois goes through an interdimensional gate that Professor Hamilton has just created for whatever reason.
Doesn't really give an explanation.
He said it's based on technology from the Phantom Zone. That's like that's the explanation. So Lois gets sucked into this portal. She comes out. She's immediately in, this dark, gritty Metropolis where Superman has taken over, and it's like 10 minutes straight of her just meeting characters from Superman the Animated Series as they are in this other dimension. So we get Turpin, Jimmy, Angela, Mercy. It's just like Lois reacting. Most of this episode is just Lois reacting to seeing people she knows. And then once you get...
And she's just as surprised each time that they
Yes.
exist in this universe,
Absolutely.
right? And that they're different.
It's like, you give her one or two with, like, Turpin and Jimmy, but once she figures out it's an alternate reality...
And that was my first question. It's like, she understands immediately that this is a different universe because she points out to Professor Hamilton at the start, hey, it's different. And she knows it's an interdimensional portal. So the first clue is that she knows it's another dimension she gets sucked into. So why is she surprised that people are different?
Yeah, I don't know. But that's about the first 10 minutes, and then she finally meets up with Superman, and Superman reveals that her death in this dimension caused him, as we mentioned, to take over Metropolis, to team up with Lex Luthor, who he says is there to run the day-to-day of a totalitarian regime. That's another thing, too. It's like, it's not at all... And again, maybe you can blame this on, because it's a 22-minute single episode, maybe this should have been a two-parter or something. But it's like, did the U.S. government just let Superman take over this town with no resistance? Did Batman or the Flash or Dr. Fate or any of the other heroes that we have seen appear to this point in the DCAU, this is a little into season 2 now, as far as the timeline goes, did like no other superhero try to get involved? Did the military not try to get involved? Because all we see is Superman's girlfriend blew up. Not even his girlfriend. His friend blew up in a car.
His platonic female friend,
right.
As you put it.
And then he and Lex Luthor took over an entire city and put people in internment camps. No modern day subtext there. That's another thing. This hits on weird real world stuff that like we as a country, as a world, deal with in real life in some ways, of different types of fascism being implemented in real world situations.
Parents being ripped away from their children,
right?
For whatever reason. Now, granted, this was 1997 that this was done,
right.
So it's not like we're watching this. We're underdwellers, we could say, which there's going to be a lot of comparisons here because of your low score.
Yeah.
Between this and the underdwellers, but underdwellers, let's be honest, child abuse has been a thing for forever.
Right.
So it's hard to look at that episode and say, gee, why did you guys decide to do an episode about taking advantage of little children?
Right.
This episode, you can't necessarily say that they had the forethought or knowledge that in 2018 there would be a section
Correct.
of our population that would view this type of rule and would see and compare it and see it very similar, or similarities between this and our
the
current
idea
president.
of someone who uses fascistic qualities. I'm not claiming anybody is Hitler or anything, just to be clear here. We're not trying to burn this thing down just yet. But the idea, it was a bit more of a fantasy story that this sort of thing could happen to people in America,
sure.
Or in a big city like a Metropolis type city in 1997. So I understand that part. So that's part of it. I think is watching this with 2018 eyes is striking. It's too real in some spots, but then there's other parts of the plot. Like the first person we see when she transports to the other dimension is Dan Turpin, and he is one of the stormtrooper cop. He's like a general or a lieutenant. Yeah, he's in the uniform and he's enforcing Superman and Luthor's law. Now, part of that is because we're coming off. Our last episode was on Apocalypse Now, where the whole point is that Dan Turpin is this free spirit who would rather be killed than ever bow to a fascist or a dictator.
Right.
But it's also just in general. It's like the character that we have seen of Dan Turpin, he would be leading the resistance. He wouldn't be a cop in this world. It's like we have long-haired mullet Jimmy Olsen leading the resistance.
With terrible, awful facial hair.
Yes, with his like 6 hairs on his face, and we have Turpin being like another stormtrooper basically. I thought that characterization sucked. It doesn't belong in the Dan Turpin, because as far as we know, we've been set up. This is the exact same world, except on one occasion, Superman got to the scene of the crime too late to save Lois, and that's our breaking point of when our two paths diverge.
Right.
So otherwise, as far as we know, Turpin was Turpin, Jimmy was Jimmy. Everybody was the same until that moment. So why Turpin in this world would suddenly become a bootlicker for an authoritarian regime, more totalitarian. I'm getting into my putting on my poli-sci hat here, but the idea that he would become a cog in the machine of this terrible fascist government is preposterous, and it's a disservice to the character. I thought that sucked, and it's done just so you could have the reveal of, oh, he's, the cop is Turpin. Like, it sucked. It sucked, and it betrays what we know that character to be.
It is a lot of, oh, don't forget, this is a character in the real universe, too. Yeah. It's, I felt, I don't know. Like, I feel let down by this episode for sure, because I really was looking forward to doing it.
Well, since I've covered most of the negatives with my very low score, are there some positives that I am leaving out, you think?
Okay, I like the fact, so this is if we're going to look at the silver lining, which I don't mind doing, it's the introduction to a multiverse. We get the first, and they don't call it the multiverse, but the first idea that there are multiple universes, and of course that is much played into, as we said later on, with the Injustice, or with the Justice Lords, and so we have that. I guess we can look to, it does speak to also, I guess, our universe's Superman, and I guess that age-old struggle that he has of when does he decide that what is happening is right or fair, or what, he fights for truth, justice, and the American way, as the old line goes, but what is truth to him, or what is justice, what looks like justice to him, what happens when he's faced with a huge injustice?
Yeah.
Imagine that.
It's a personal crisis versus him intervening in people's lives he doesn't know. This is the person he cares about perhaps more than anybody else.
And the difference, I think, in this Superman versus the other Supermen that we've seen take this sort of stance is this Superman is redeemed at the end. This Superman is still our Superman. He just made a bad decision. And you can kind of look at, so the Superman from the Injustice games is never redeemed.
No.
He's a jerk. Like, he sucks. Like, he's evil, and even beyond the fact that he's shown that he's evil, continues to make evil decisions. And Justice Lord Superman is exactly the same way. They have seen what the results of what they're doing is doing to the world, and they don't care because they're being selfish. This Superman, at least at the end, is redeemed. Lois gives him a chance to see the internment camps and what Luthor is doing, and it turns out that Superman was so focused and was just being selfish in this right, that when he's shown that he's being selfish, what has happened as a result of it, at least in some way, this Superman is redeemed. We never get a follow-up story. We never find out whether or not this universe's Superman ends up giving power back over to the right authorities, or whatever happens to it. It's kind of left up in the air. We don't know what happens, but at least his final conversation with Lois is one of positivity. And it doesn't leave on a completely sour note. I guess that's my silver lining this episode. I give it 5 out of 10. It's yeah. I was not as disappointed or upset as you were about it, clearly, but this episode definitely I remembered it far more fondly than I experienced it this time.
All right, I guess we can jump from there right into music. Not a big factor for me. There's a cool Superman theme. It starts out, some of the notes are very similar to the classic Superman theme that we know. Then it's played in a very minor key and sort of shifts, and I'll let you talk about that in more detail because you had an interesting take there. But aside from that, there's not a lot. There's some nice music, chase music at the end in Superman's confrontation with Lex, as Lex tries to escape in a kind of a cool ship and he flies away, but kind of a non-factor to me. I went 5 out of 10 for that.
Yeah.
Nothing great.
Yeah, same. I did like the Superman theme. That gave me a notch above yours. I gave it a 6 out of 10 for music. The Superman theme I thought was interesting that they decided just for this one episode, and that shows that they were at least they tried. They tried with this episode to make it something. They went, instead of just playing, if we're going to do a comparison here, you look at the Justice League live-action movie that just came out, where they took the John Williams theme, and they sort of, they played it when he, spoiler alert, he comes back to life and he's not
What?
of sound mind, and he attacks the Justice League, which is a good scene. It's a fun, certainly maybe one of the top 2 scenes in the movie as far as fun is concerned.
You can also tell it's from the original cut because his lip doesn't look weird.
Yeah.
Hashtag Snyder Cut.
Yeah, for serious though. Anyway, so they took the composer took the original John Williams theme and he changed some of the notes so that it sound, he flattened some notes and he changes the key a little bit to make it sound more menacing. I think that could have been an easy out here that they could have taken with it and just change up a couple of the notes.
It's him! Blast him! Get him! Get him!
From the standard Superman theme, but they went darker with it. There's even notes of almost like a Batman type theme in the Superman theme, leading you to see that this Superman of this universe, he's not the bright, sunshiny, positive Superman that we know and love. They're going out of their way to show you that this guy is dark.
Good people fear him.
Right.
Like that's and again that's more of a Batman thing.
Certainly.
When he shows up, you can see the looks of concerns and stuff on their face, which we can get into in visuals.
Yep.
But yeah, music, that Superman theme's definitely the bright spot of music.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to visuals then while we're doing it. I think that the visuals in this, and you can certainly talk about it because you had some good points about it, but I think that the look of this other Metropolis, this alternate Metropolis, is interesting. It lends, again, they're trying to communicate to you that this is a whole different world. They're going out of their way to make sure that you understand that this universe is bleak. There's no bright sunshine literally in this episode. It's dark.
And that's something we've mentioned on a couple of our first Superman episodes that we covered, was how much of a stark contrast Metropolis generally looks compared to Gotham City. You don't see a lot of... It doesn't look very grimy. We have the hashtag SkyTrain. We have, it looks like it's a city on the rise. It's a wealthy city. It's a thriving city.
Right.
And here it's, again, very much the buildings are all dark for the most part. The whole episode takes place at night, which I think also helps there. We mentioned that before.
It's got a lot of sort of over-the-top architecture, too, in the way that the Gotham City was done in the Schumacher films, or
a lot of big statues of Superman and Lex standing back to back.
The building that Superman, I guess, lives in is shaped like his logo.
Yes,
complete with rooftop pool with the S cutting right down the middle. Actually, I don't know if it was rooftop pool, but it looked like it. But yeah, it's designed. I think the designers did a great job. Had some fun with it, showing, hey, like this is not your mama's Metropolis.
Yeah, I agree there. Superman's suit is really awesome.
Oh, it's super cool.
As far as the fascist Superman looks in the Justice Lords episode, he has the big white and black suit. It's all right.
I prefer this costume to that, though. If of my fascist Superman,
there are a few. There's Red Sun out there.
I actually do love the Red Sun Superman is a great visual in and of itself. I mean, that's
sure.
Speak whatever you say about communism, but the
they know how to dress.
Yeah, they sure do know how to dress their Supermen. But yeah, this is a cool. He's got leather gloves and boots. No cape. Sorry, Liam. No hashtag cape movement.
Yeah, that was a bummer. But that again added to the sense of dread for me throughout this whole time. When he's flying to catch Luthor at the end, there's no cape. So,
let's be honest. That's the real reason why you hated this episode.
That might be it.
The lack of cape.
The lack of hashtag cape movement. Finally, the real Superman does show up in like the last 30 seconds of the episode, and we get a little bit of it to
I feel like it's hanging outside of the dimension, though. You can't really see it.
Not really. It's mostly in the last shot where Lois and our Superman are talking to each other, and they're flying through the city.
Redemption,
you get a little bit at the end, but yes, no cape for Superman. Again, yeah, it's a really cool design. It's very striking. Again, you're used to the bright colors and hopefulness of Superman.
It also gives you the military feel also.
Yes.
Gloves,
the S
boots.
on this Superman's chest does not stand for hope.
Agreed. Yeah. It also sort of looks like the semi-Nazi S logo.
Yes,
that they
you
have
could
on
very
the-
easily add a second S on that logo,
Yeah.
and it would fit pretty well.
Yeah.
But yes, so the visuals are all very striking. As I said, I gave visuals 7 out of 10. They're very strong. Animation a little bit off in a few scenes. I didn't think Lois looks a little.
She looks a little
wonky.
emaciated in some of
Yeah, she's so it's just a little, again, a little off model. We talked about that, I think, in our Apocalypse Now episode. Little things like that can take you out of moments a little bit. Nothing too drastic, like I said, but still strong.
Jimmy Olsen's
Yes.
giant orange mullet.
Did not care for the Jimmy Olsen redesign here. But overall, I said visuals are absolutely the best part of this episode. I gave it a 7 out of 10 for visuals. It's definitely the highest score I'm giving today.
My highest score also, I gave it 8 out of 10. For all those reasons.
Yeah. All right.
Ready to move on to our last category, which is voice acting. And I was a little bit shocked at your score that you have for this. I thought that it is the Dana Delaney show.
Yeah.
She carries the episode. It's her story. It's her character story. And I thought that she did perfectly fine. It is, as you pointed out, a lot of... she is hampered a little bit, significant amount by the script and the amount of time she has to sort of incredulously say people's names.
It's a lot of her being, again, like we talked about in plot, it's just her being surprised over and over again because Mercy, Luthor, Jimmy,
Right.
like it's a lot of that.
It is, and it is. But there is some touching moments that she has with the Otherworld Superman, and when, the final scene when she comes back and interacts with the real world Superman. There's that sense of relief that she offers. I thought Superman is fine. What did you think of Tim Daly in this episode?
I thought he was a little wooden. I thought when he's describing how his world completely changed when Lois died, he mentions that even he didn't realize how much he loved her.
Perhaps it was because she was a platonic friend.
Right. I mean, it's established he never got to tell her how he felt because he himself didn't realize how he felt until she was gone.
Right.
That's a real heavy thing, and I thought he was just... It didn't sound all that different from when Superman just talks normally to me. And
Yeah,
part of that is...
emotional.
And again, maybe you're comparing that to George Newbern in Justice League, who maybe had a little bit more of a vocal range than Tim Daly did. We'll certainly get into that later on when we start reviewing Justice League. But I didn't think Tim Daly was very strong here. I thought the strong points are, as you mentioned, are Dana Delaney in her interactions with Superman. And Lex Clancy Brown, very, very good to me, the MVP of this story. Of
he's
how
tremendous.
he took this tragedy, this emotionally vulnerable Superman, and immediately was able to twist him into, going along with him.
It's funny because Lois points out even in her dialogue that the only thing that is exactly the same from this universe is Lex Luthor.
Lex Luthor is the multiversal constant, as the question later on says, A is A, and whatever dimension, Luthor is Luthor.
Good callback, man. That is, and it's true. In this dimension, he's just as slimy, he's just as conniving, takes advantage of whatever situation presents itself for him to grab power, for him to grab wealth, for him to be in control. And it's such a satisfying end to see him crash his jet into his own face.
A giant statue of himself, yes. So Clancy Brown's very good. I thought Dana Laney was good as well. I thought everybody else kind of... David Kaufman, one of the first episodes we've watched where he's had more than a few lines as Jimmy Olsen, didn't think he was very good. And other minor characters like Angela or Mercy or Turpin really don't say that much. Mm-hmm. So it's really, you got to focus on the three leads as we talk about often. So I went with 5 out of 10. Like I said, I think there's a couple of strong scenes, but overall not a spectacular episode by anybody.
For Clancy Brown's performance alone and the fact that he's able to translate that, I mean, it wasn't a stretch for him to play somebody different. Granted, a couple of those other guys were supposed to be playing different types of the same character, but Clancy Brown, great, 7 out of 10. All right, so that brings our final scores. Liam, what was your final score out of that?
So my final score is 20 out of 40.
Which feels very high for the amount of passion that you had going into this episode.
Well, again, the vitriol mostly came from a plot standpoint. Like I said, as you can tell by how much I yelled during plot compared to how mostly normal I have been for the rest of the...
Yeah.
So it's probably good we got that out of the way first. But yeah, like, overall, again, sometimes we talk about the plot doesn't... The scores don't always reflect directly how much we enjoyed this episode. But yeah, here it might not have communicated enough how much I really didn't enjoy.
You went
watching
back
this.
to give the listeners at home just a little sneak peek into what was going on. You went back and forth about giving this a lower score than you did for the Underdwellers.
I almost gave this 2 out of 10. Now, as I mentioned at the start, I gave Underdwellers a 3 out of 10 because I guess we enjoyed the Alfred subplot or something.
I guess,
but hard to remember. I was younger then.
We're not allowed to talk about that episode,
right?
Anyway.
So why not? And I'll never figure out why.
Put $1 in the Underdwellers jar,
right.
Liam.
Sorry, cha-ching. But yeah, so I couldn't bring myself to give it a score lower because again, at least at the very least, I thought the idea is interesting here, but the execution of this story to me, like I said, it's too real in some part, and it's too light or too. It doesn't give enough detail into how this world came about, what the rest of the world's reaction would be to Superman taking over a single city.
Yeah. Would have been more interesting as a two-parter, I think.
Yeah,
I think
definitely. And as you mentioned, and we sort of get that two-parter in Justice League eventually, certainly, and it's explored in various other comic books and video games and stuff. So to me, it's just there's this idea is interesting, and it's something that should be looked at in multiple different ways. But this is definitely, to me, the weakest and worst adaptation of that basic idea of some sort of tragedy makes Superman decide he can't stand by. He can't just be the fireman anymore. He has to be the ruler.
Maybe we can look at it as this paved the way for those other ones.
Yeah, and again, you definitely have a silver lining. Your score's a little higher for plot, and I think for everything, basically.
Yes, pretty much everything.
So this is probably the closest to disagreeing.
What was your final score?
My final score was 20 out of 40.
20 out of 40,
which, again, maybe sounds a little high after how much I ripped into this, but mostly it's just for that plot. It's just the execution wasn't there for me. What about you? What's your final score?
Final score, 26 out of 40. Neither of us have bonus points for this episode, so those are our final scores. I really wish that this episode had been better, but still reigning supreme as highest ranked Superman episode goes to late Mr. Kent thus far.
Absolutely.
All right, so with that, we're going to wrap things up for this week's episode. Thank you all for tuning in and listening. We appreciate every single one of you. If you have any feedback, what are your thoughts on this episode? Go back and watch this. It's available on Amazon for free. We're not getting paid to shill Amazon either.
But if they wanted to pay us,
we
that'd
definitely
be rad.
take money from them. Absolutely. If you're listening, Amazon,
please give us some of your billions of dollars, Jeff Bezos.
Yes, please. So if go back and watch this episode, let us know what you think of it. Do you think the execution was well? Do you think that it rings true in a real world sense that we need to think about? Give us some feedback. Shoot Liam some tweets over at DCAU Review. We also are on Facebook. But Liam, tell the lovely listeners at home why we don't use our Facebook.
Because Facebook, much like the terrible totalitarian regime seen in today's Superman episode, are brutal dictators who force you to pay if you want your posts to be seen by anybody.
And we're not giving them the satisfaction of having our money.
Correct.
So, sorry, if you like Facebook, you can talk to us on there, but more likely than not...
You're going to have to seek us out, is what I'm saying.
Exactly. Don't let us call you. You call us.
Exactly.
And then, of course, you can always check us out on iTunes. Please subscribe to us. Give us a 5-star review while you're on there. If you agree, if you don't like us, give us a lower review. Just give us some sort of review. Any reviews help us out. We prefer a 5-star one if you can. And, of course, subscribe to us on iTunes, and you'll get updated every single time we post a brand new episode. Liam, anything before we sign off?
Well, I get the feeling when we post this one, I'll make it clear that one of us liked it okay and the other one hated it hardcore. I think this will be an episode that will spawn some interesting discussion, certainly. And I'm always happy to talk with anybody at DCA Review again. On Twitter. Yeah. And this one will be interesting to discuss. I'm interested to see where this ranks on other people's all-time list. Maybe people really love this episode, and I'm an outlier.
Maybe they remember it fondly like we do, and just haven't
and
watched it.
Again, watching this with 2018 eyes just ruined this for me. So, we'll see. We'll see going forward how much is this the lowest rated Superman episode we'll ever do? Probably not, because eventually we got to get into like Toyman and stuff,
and Lightner, and Unity.
Yeah, so probably not the lowest we'll ever go, but this is certainly, I think, a shockingly low episode considering how we felt about it going in.
I would agree. All right, so with that, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on next week's episode.
Goodbye.